Hey, how's it going? I appreciate your attention. Today, we're going to be talking about information overload. Now, information overload is just something that I don't think we're talking about enough. And I think it has to do with a lot of the issues that we're facing today. I think probably in the future, we're going to see tons of studies about how walking around with access to the world's information in our pockets and being bombarded by notifications and screens, and how we move from one screen on a small screen like you're probably watching this on right now to a larger screen that might be part of your work or hobby enthusiastic, like computer monitor screen, and over to like a large giant television screen. And we're just shifting from one screen to another. And when we're in the car, we put the radio on, and we're just bombarded 24/7 with information overload. And we're not wired for that. We weren't created for that. We, in a very short time frame, have gone from a society that spends most of its time doing face-to-face interactions, doing manual hobbies and tasks and interests, and having to go to the library to look at a book, to read, and if we want to educate ourselves, sitting in front of a screen. And we've kind of put that on steroids with this whole COVID situation and the pandemic that we're facing. So, in one way, that should be an encouragement to you that all the crazy stuff that we're facing right now could possibly be a result of some mathematic principle. Like when we add up how we're wired innately and in our being and how we're created to function and interact, and how we've evolved. And when I talk about evolved, I'm not talking about a physical evolution. I'm talking about the evolution of society, how we've evolved as a society over hundreds and thousands of years. And in this very short frame of history, we've had to deal with so many different things that within a generation, we haven't had time to really pull apart and discuss and figure out the positives and negatives and how we deal with this part of the evolution of our society. And there's not a whole lot of people giving advice or studies or really talking about this. And so it really, really is just part of this math that creates the situation that we're in right now. It's not an intentional thing. It's not something that somebody set out to inflict harm on us with. It's something as a society we're facing this point, and we have to come together to figure out what the ramifications of that are. Now, one of the basic, again, following this math principle of cause and effect, one of the basic problems that gives us, presents to us as a society, is that it creates habits within us to be more reactionary versus intentional. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, when we have access to pushing buttons and we have access to changing screens and doing all this stuff of all the amount of content and choices that we have, it's kind of like when we got all the Walmarts and Targets and big box stores like in our neighborhoods. All of a sudden, consumerism just spiked out of control because now we have the ability to impulsively purchase. And we're doing the same thing with all this media that's in front of us and is served to us, is that as soon as we digest this information, all too often, we're not taking the time to process it, to stop and process it and to think about it. And we instead are reacting to it. If it's something that spurs a reaction of an emotional behavior behind us, and there's like a comment section, a lot of times we may comment, we may hit the like button, we may do these different things that's purely reactional. It's our first step out of the gate of digesting this information. One of the other things that we could do is we could simply go on to the next piece of information, often to the point and the goal of finding a piece of information that we can immediately react upon. And this has caused us to, as a society, become much more reactionary as opposed to intentional with our habits and our thought process. And it's put us in a position where anybody who identifies that and sees that can now push our buttons because they know we will most likely react rather than stop and digest and question the information that they're providing for us. So one of the really critical problems that this has caused is that it has squeezed that space that we have always reserved in our brains for critical thinking. Now, critical thinking means that we are going to take chunks of little information. You can call them facts or opinions or all these other things. They're really just data points, little parts of information. We're going to take those, and rather than formulate an opinion right away from it, we are going to take those little data points and we are going to critically think and analyze those data points with our own brain and use critical thinking to come to the conclusions and the opinions that we determine are correct for any given topic or piece of information. So I think that this is having a humongous effect on what we're seeing unfold, especially in this past year, is that the space reserved for our critical thinking is shrinking. And unfortunately, a lot of the folks that are benefiting from that are doing their very best to keep you in a place of remaining reactionary and to keep you in a place to quell any ability for you to harness the power of critical thinking. And so that's something that I would encourage you to just think about. Think about the different places where you go for information. Think about the different media and places that just anything to do with information. Think about all those that you surround yourself with and try to see if they are contributing to a loss of critical thinking or if they are contributing to a growth in your critical thinking. Because there's one thing for certain. We desperately need room for critical thinking in our society if we are ever to get to a place where we are solving problems more than creating problems. One of the other problems about information overload is the effect of the echo chamber algorithm. What I mean by this is that a lot of the places where we go to consume media, whether that's through social media or whether that's through some of the ways that we consume content online, whether that be through something like YouTube or a search platform like Google or Bing or Yahoo, in order to better serve you as a consumer, somebody had to write a code. Somebody had to write a program to give you what they think that you want. And all these things are becoming more and more connected. I'm sure that I'm not the only one who, after looking for something online about a certain product, started seeing ads for it pop up in other places. It's all part of that echo chamber algorithm. So this is something that I hope encourages you when you understand it in its full context, that it's just part of this math equation as to where we are right now. And so all these programs that are running in the background, creating an echo chamber, serving up what you want, is also preventing us from seeing a broader scope of information, seeing a broader scope of data, so that we can actually consider a multitude of opinions, ideas, and data points ourselves and harness our power of critical thinking. And so what happens is the more and more fine-tuned that those algorithms focus in on us and put us in that echo chamber, the less and less opportunity we have for critical thinking. And so my encouragement to you on that point is to just see this play out, be mindful of it. And whenever there's something that elicits a reactionary response in you, think back to not only the way that things are set up to promote that reactionary response, but also, are you in a place that is providing this echo chamber algorithm that maybe if you step back for a minute and considered, how do I get outside this algorithm and look at a broader spectrum and look at maybe a high level view of that topic, data point, or information, I don't know, piece, that maybe there's more things to consider before you arrive at a conclusion. And the last point I'll talk about, which could possibly be one of the most detrimental points, I think, to this information overload age that we're dealing with, is something I call trust in pixels over people. And what I mean by that is that if you have formed a reliance on a certain media source or place where you go for information, whether it's online, through the TV, or any source of media, chances are that you've formed some kind of trust or loyalty to that outlet. And you've formed sort of this virtual relationship with that place of information. The echo chamber algorithm that we talked about supports this and often pigeonholes us into that corner so that we become consumers of where information is coming from. And at that point, when we're consuming information, it's a matter of that outlet or whatever is serving that information, of establishing that loyalty and creating a deeper bond. And often at the same time, if that source of information is aware of people's behavior in today's age, they are serving up information that is promoting a reactionary response and a reactionary habit forming relationship as part of that content. So what all this leads to is that all too often what I'm seeing is that people are having trust in pixels, into relationships with these sources and outlets that they are consuming through their media, whether it be through internet or TV or radio or whatever. They're trusting those outlets more so than actual human beings that they interact with. Their loyalty is daily. I think about people who may turn into a certain program every day, and every day they have this faithful reliance that they can go there and it's part of their ritual. And it establishes this relationship that people in their everyday life, number one, usually don't have the same time dedicated to that interaction. And number two, if they say anything outside of this echo chamber algorithm that is being promoted over here, that they're often dismissed. And so we're left in this position where we're trusting pixels over people, and it is definitely contributing to a lot of the issues we're seeing in today's society. I think about a conversation that I had with one of my kids when they got quite emotional about an experience that they had online, where they were interacting with different people online and they had formed this kind of emotional attachment relationship to some of those people. And something happened, I forget exactly what it was, but it left him at a point where it put an emotional strain on him. And I had to have a talk with him of understanding, like, even in that case where it was people directly communicating and engaging using technology, it was still just a screen that he was ultimately communicating with. And so I think a lot of times we don't understand that. And I think that there is some benefit to understanding that there are people on the other side of that screen. I think certainly there's a case for saying the toxic way that we interact online. I think that, it may be a good idea to promote to people that, hey, there's another person on the other end of that screen when we're having these conversations. But at the same time, it's still a screen that we are interacting with as opposed to a person face to face. And so that's left us in a place where we are really working on habits and establishing habits and growing habits and skills that have to do with communicating and ways that we can foster that communication through some type of electronic device rather than person to person. And the thing is that, like, there's a whole different dynamic in that. When you sit down in a room with somebody and you have a discussion, a lot of times you are a little bit more apt to the nuance of that conversation about finding the common ground. Why? Because I'm sitting across from another human and I can see the traits in that person across from me, and I can see how they are more common, and we have so many things in common before we even start talking. I see that that person's got, 5 fingers on each hand. They've got a head, they've got eyes. Some of the really simple things that are happening in the background of our subliminal, powerful brain that establish this baseline of, hey, we're both people. As opposed to when we're communicating with the screen, we don't get to have that introductory experience to set our minds in place for us being on a way that we can be considerate of each person's individual selves, and the way that we can come together and unify, and the common bonds that we have to promote and foster a positive outcome from that interaction. Yeah. So to sum it all up, we are in an age of information overload, and we have not put the brakes on. We have not paused and stopped and thought about what that means, how that's changing our society, how that's changing our culture, and most importantly, how that's changing ourselves. And so I guess if there's an action step out of this, it's my encouragement to you to think about yourself, because you are a part of this society and you are part of this culture. How are you interacting with technology? How are you possibly getting barraged and overloaded with information? Are you taking steps and actions throughout the course of your day? Are you establishing good habits to break you and separate you from this onslaught of information? Are you taking steps and actions in your daily behavior to maintain that space of critical thinking that has, for years and decades and centuries, provided mankind with the ability to move forward and provide a better society than we've had in the past? Because ultimately, it all comes down to us, and it's on us to leave this world in a better place. So if you made it this far, I just want to thank you again for your attention. I hope we'll talk again soon. Until then, keep the faith.